Okay, welcome everybody to the podcast whomipodcast.com. Today I have on my friend Falk Castell. He is an artist in Germany. We had him on before a few years ago, and we share a lot of the same thoughts. We like to philosophize and talk about psychology, but me more from a scientific approach, and Falk more from an artistic one. But you can be an artist and a thinker at the same time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, our topic is on conditioning, and we want to become aware ourselves and maybe help our listeners to become more aware of how we are conditioned, maybe how much and how deep it goes, and where it comes from. And so, the one thing I always think of is the influence of our parents and other people in our early childhood. I think we are very much like a sponge, more than ever later, where we just soak up everything we learn, but it's informal learning. Obviously, the natural kind of learning can go a lot deeper and influence us a lot stronger than formal learning, I believe. What other influences can you think of that shape our conditioning?
Our human physical existence is very conditioning. There was a moment in my life where I kind of woke up and felt that my intelligence was completely being betrayed by my physical condition as a human being. And I was like, this really sucks. And I kind of felt that I had reached an intellectual point where I was well above the human existence, and then I realized, oh my goodness, I kind of have to. Do I really have to go through this? Like, oh my goodness, this is going to be mad. And I looked at nature, and I realized there's a lot of conditioning happening through genetics, and we are not even able to perceive the level that it goes to. Because remember, if you look at a bird and the parent birds, they build a nest. And there are some species in Africa that build incredibly intricate nests where they weave the grass, they even make knots. They make fake entrances to ward off snakes and other intruders. They are incredibly sophisticated and advanced. Now, when a bird lays an egg into the nest and the little chick hatches, how do these little birds know exactly what to do once they fledge? Because they never, ever see how their parents build a nest. So I was wondering, how is this knowledge, this generational knowledge, transmitted into the next one without having the typical copy-paste mechanism that we often quote as human beings to be one of the main sources of learning and hence a source of conditioning. So I realized that a lot of the knowledge that we use as humans is imparted genetically and is kind of like passed on without us even knowing about it. I have a friend, for example, who has never been to war. However, for many years, he was troubled by nightmares about war crimes in the First World War. And he was able to describe in great detail the things that happened, like grenades exploding next to him and body parts like flying all around. And he was able to find out that his grandfather was in the First World War, in the Second World War, was heavily traumatized, and he never spoke about any of these experiences. And this emotional trauma, it settled down into the genetic level and then was basically passed on to the next generation, where someone kind of had the time to work it all out. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, if we go to the Old Testament, we see where when I think it's in Deuteronomy, where these rules and all these laws are laid out. And it says, if you do this, then you sin, and it will pass down in the generation until the fourth and third generation. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It sounds like a curse, but it seems like they kind of known already. They figured out that there is a genetical transmission, or like a transmission of knowledge into another generation. And I thought that was just very interesting and very well observed. So the genetics are indeed a big source, and who you marry and who your parents are will greatly determine how you think, what you think, why you think it. It will decide on many of the ideas you have, many of the choices that you make, and you will feel like it's freedom, but basically it's already like pre-traced, and there's a very high probability that you will take that route because it feels smooth, rather than taking a different route. And so each generation kind of has to cope with that.
Yeah, it's a cycle, right? When you were talking about tracks and following the smoothest path, were you talking about brain paths?
Yes, exactly.
Because you remind me of this experiment that's an EEG or something like that was able to predict someone's decision or reaction or something like that before
absolutely.
they were conscious of it.
Yeah, it's very possible, and there are even so-called magicians. What they're doing, all they're doing is micro reading into your muscle movements and reactions and so on. So they're able to predict exactly what's going to happen long before you actually know that it's going to happen. It's very easy. You just have to be very alert and attentive and observant. And I found that to be a means of great manipulation, and so I stepped back from that because I felt that it's not fair to use other human beings as a tool, and I didn't want to feel like that myself. So I just like, okay, I get that it's possible, but it's just not attractive. I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it kills freedom. It kills freedom, and it kills spontaneity and intuitiveness, and the most beautiful moments in life is when someone does something out of a pure intent without preconceived notions, and to have life happen naturally is really where the fun is, and not to have everything planned out and then just like be like a real German and just do everything to plan, according to plan. And it just, it's much nicer if you just live spontaneously, basically.
Yeah, I'm realizing that too. You mentioned free will. I think it's common for people to believe that they are deciding freely what to do, or what even to feel, or what to think. But but I don't know. And I did as well for a long time, for most of my life. And just now, recently, I'm starting to question that. And I think there is a way to live that way, but it works very differently than what we believe.
Yeah.
And one of the things is, like you said, to become aware of our current situation before we can change it.
Yeah, and I mean, we always have to look into the extremes. I was, for example, someone who was very, very well behaved and very strict and very concentrated. I danced classical ballet, which means a great deal of physical control and discipline. And then I grew up very religiously, which put a lot of constraints in my mind. And it functioned like a corset that kind of like enwrapped me, and I just knew instinctively I'm not free, and I'm kind of myself, but I'm not. And I just wanted to experience myself in different states and realize basically I'm just the same. It doesn't matter in what kind of conditioning I'm in. Now, the point where I wanted to get to was, I just forgot it, unfortunately. What was the question?
Let me distract you. Something even more extreme.
About the feelings and so on and so on, and how we think that free will is there. Okay, so this one extreme was to be super concentrated, and the other extreme would be anarchy, to break every possible rule. However, both of these extremes are very, very similar to each other, because if you break all the rules, then this is a rule in itself, because it means the rule is to break all the rules. And this will lead to people to be completely irrelevant and insubstantial, because they will all end up being exactly the same type of people, with no rules, with complete freedom, and with no inhibitions and no borders, and therefore no culture and no memory. And they're basically just dissolving like a bubble bath, you know. They're just like, they're gone. And this will happen to all of us somehow. However, I think humans have the incredible capacity to bring together energies and to make little tiny knots of energy and make them reality. This is what happens when you have a baby, for example. You know, you bring together a male and a female, and you create life, and then the story goes on. And humans have this capacity to create life from nothing, which is a very nice capacity to have, and especially with artists, I see that. If you look at Leonardo da Vinci's work, his work has a depth and a magic that no other artist ever had in this regard. And where I moved to in my brain, to uncondition myself and still be free and yet concentrated and disciplined, was the space in between. I realized I only have very few options in my brain to maneuver my decisions around. I either have yes or no, and then I realized I have also the space in between of that decision, you know, of deciding if I go this way or this way. I also have the space in between. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a very thin connection that is more like a razor blade, but let's try to live on the razor blade. Let's try to balance on that very, very fine edge, and basically to live in between all the possibilities. Because yeah, this was just a very interesting space for me to explore. It led to a sense of indifference. However, it helped me relax a lot about the strenuous consequences that you experience if you're too alert about what's going on around you and inside of you. And so this was the only place where I felt I could go to have a little bit of peace.
Yeah, let's talk about that indifference. It
Yeah.
sounds similar to nihilism. Have you thought about that?
Yes, well, I was not negating any of it. I was taking the whole thing, basically. I was realizing that all is possible, and I took it as such. And then I tried to look at what is the best decision for all of it. I was not just being egoistic and trying to decide for me what is best for me. I was trying to look at the whole picture, see, okay, where will the consequences go also for the other people that are involved. And I did not annihilate any of it. I understand that there's a certain attractiveness to do that, but it's just not appealing to me because I find it useless. It's not attractive to me to just throw everything away, because there is value in this substance.
Yeah.
I rather go for absurdity than nihilism.
I see. Yeah. You talk about possibilities and between possibilities.
Yeah.
Is that because your brain or your conditioning tells you there are only these possibilities, choose one, and then you think, well, actually, I don't have to listen to you.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. There was a Qigong master in China who was able to ground himself so well on the ground that 30 people pushing against him with all their strength were not able to topple him. You know, he withstood that, and he was able to collect all this energy and just direct it downwards. So he was not an obstacle to that energy, and so he did not fail. And I realized, if I have the right mindset, basically, then this is exactly what I can do in my mind as well. And just be very calm, very composed, and be indifferent about being attacked personally. I just feel, oh, there's an energy, it's coming towards me.
Mm-hmm.
Let that just run right through it and see what happens, and then see what decision can be made and what is the best one to choose. So I'm trying to step away from reality and watch kind of as a bystander, and then make a decision from that point, rather than to be too much in the moment and to be taken up by emotions. Emotions really drive you up into a certain mood, and they push you also in towards certain actions. And I just think freedom is the freedom to choose between all these options, and then to see which one you like best in that moment. No?
Yeah, that's amazing. I can resonate with that it's really hard for me to step aside and become an observer, become objective,
Yeah.
because I very quickly can get upset and, triggered by that energy that you mentioned, that you also called it an attack. And you said that we're so obsessed with our safety that we forget that it's actually possible to not care about your safety. And
Yep.
you will have a lot more freedom and have a larger vision, and then realize what is actually important and valuable. And it is not survival. That's not the most important thing.
Yeah. There was a quick story of one of the musicians on the Titanic, who was lucky enough to have a seat in a lifeboat, one of the early ones. And then, as the boat was lowered to the sea, there was a young woman with two children, and she was asking to be in the lifeboat, and he gave up his space, knowing that he was not able to swim. And so he sacrificed himself to give his spot to this young mother with her two sons. And they both knew they will not see each other again, ever again. And she will be eternally indebted to this young musician to give up his life for theirs. And I kind of think that that's exactly where he knew he was probably very calm and collected, and he was freely giving up his life as an existence for this little family. And it's hard to realize that, because we think we want to be so substantial in our existence, in our little life that we have, and we actually have no control about it. And
Mhm.
we just live in the self-made illusion that we are in charge, but we're not. And we have to fall in love with that, and we have to be okay with that. And this is the peace that we really need, is to know that whatever may come, it's okay. And it's not even up to us to judge that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, right and wrong or good and bad are subjective, and we
Oh,
have the
very much.
capacity to let go of
Yeah.
that belief.
Yeah, absolutely. I oftentimes joked that even bad people do good to each other. You know, all the hedge fund managers who do a lot of like financial crimes, they still push around money to help each other do business. So, even really bad people, they do good to each other. It's just all a matter of perspective and balance.
You mentioned earlier identity and culture and rules.
Mm.
I thought that was really interesting because you said you you can't imagine a life. Well, you didn't say this exactly, but it's not realistic to have a life without any identity or purpose. Is that kind of what you were saying? Or how
Yeah.
would life be without any identity and idea of who you are?
Well, it would be very, very, very ugly because without personality, there is no interest in learning and in getting to know other people, because we live in this illusion that I think everybody believes to some degree that they're special, and that what they're doing is right with their life. I know I have met some people who don't think that, who are very humble, who are like, oh, I'm not special, and so on. But from the ones I've encountered and from the trend that we have in our society, most people really want to be something and want to be noticed. And we need identity to be distinguishable from each other. I mean, by nature, we all have different fingerprints, even though there's 8 billion people and more on the planet. And so many different hair colors and so many different backgrounds and stories that everybody brings to the table. We're not here to ask why. I think all we can do is just really participate in the game and do our best. Mother Nature is far more knowledgeable and powerful than we are, and we are not in charge of this game. We just need to act our part, and kind of within the horizon that we have and that we've worked out, just do our best and be our best. And that's really all we can do. And let's bring up this example again from the little bird. When the birds build a nest, sometimes very intricately complex, and the little bird that grows inside the egg never watches the parents build the nest. But when the hatchling comes out of the egg, they grow up, they kind of have this knowledge implanted genetically, because they copy exactly how the parents built the nest without ever watching them. So there's a transmission of knowledge through genetics, and I think that humans just have very, very similar programming, basically, and we just have no idea what genetics really are for, how they function. For me, it looks like a piano, a set of piano keys. We sometimes portray genetics as like these interlocking molecules that come together and that kind of shape the genetic code. And for me, this is like black and white keys on a piano.
Okay.
And depending on which chord is activated, you have a different kind of realization of these genetics within a person. That's why we have different characters, even in twins and triplets, quadruplets. That's the reason behind it.
So if so much is pre-programmed into us from genetics, from the way we're raised, and other influences like education, religion, then doesn't that mean that we're just a machine and we're not alive?
Yes and no. I mean, let's say it that way. Let's say we're not a machine because it's not mechanical, but in some way it's kind of predictable, because the way everything happens is set up. So we have time X, we're born, we die, and in between happens life. And I wanted to get into the topic of copy-paste, because before we're born, we exist in a different state. I think, how should we say that without getting too etherical? So once we're born, actually, we are in a state of copy-paste all the time. We learn something, and we kind of implement that into our genetics, and then we're going to pass it on to the next generation in some way. I think this kind of knowledge transfer is very automatical, and we can't really change that. And I think there's no real advancement in humanity ever. I think we've always been very, very similar, even 30,000 years ago and more.
Mm.
We're very, very close to how we functioned even at that time. And how we evolved in stages might have been very physical. However, I think even these Neanderthals and so on, all these different species of human existence, they've had a lot of capacities that we're not using anymore because we have kind of taken a different job. I think if we look at Aborigines, for example, and how empathetic they are connected to nature, they are incredible. They live so in tune with their surrounding, and we as Western modernized human beings, we have no connection like that whatsoever. We actually lack that within ourselves, towards ourselves, and towards other people. So we're actually heavily disconnected, and we kind of strive to make up for that by over consuming media. That's what I think. And so we condition ourselves to be more and more mechanical, and then we end up, as Futurama predicted it, like these useless heads that live in these glass containers, because that's all that will be left. Where it will, everything that we consume right now is through our eyes mostly, and so the rest of our body we actually don't need anymore. It's just to keep the rest of the consumption mechanism alive, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that, and it's really, really bad. It's an abuse of mankind and the possibilities that we actually have as human beings.
So what is there outside of conditioning? How could you imagine life being if it's not following the program?
Well, switch off your cell phone, go to Australia and live with the Aborigines.
Sure.
There you have your answer. Or go and live with the Sioux or the Inuit or all these like really, really old nature cultures, I would call it. They have a symbiosis with Mother Earth that we really need on this planet to heal personally and globally. And I hope that we will have presidents from these people. I hope that we will have lawmakers and judges. And I hope that we'll have a new type of bureaucracy that is more in tune with nature. I hope that nature or planet Earth will get the title of being treated as a person, so that we can sue companies if they treat Earth badly.
Yeah.
You know, and sue them in the name of Mother Earth. Basically, that would be very good if that happens. So just like water was declared a human right, Mother Earth needs to be a natural person. In the judicial terms.
Earlier, you said there are rules in our society, in our personal life, and deciding to live with no rules is also living a rule. And
Absolutely.
I think that's an important insight. Is it then possible to actually live outside of rules, or is it just never possible?
It's not possible because even the way we think is very humanly programmed. There was a test done in the 16th century, I think it was. It was by a duke in Italy, and he wanted to discover the Adamic language, or the language that was spoken by the first humans. And what he did is he took away newborn babies from their mother and put them in rooms with nannies to breastfeed these babies, but they were forbidden to speak a single word with these children. And they were just put in their beds, and then this duke hoped that they would grow up and kind of develop their own language and kind of come up with this Adamic language. But they all died. Unfortunately, all of them died. They were perfectly healthy in one way or the other, but they were not sick. but they died because of the lack of connectedness, and they died because they were missing their mothers. So humans are very, very dependent on emotional connections, and we really don't realize that. And the disruptiveness of war and crime and trauma and drugs is really, really bad for all these finely tuned emotional neurons that make up our existence. And within anarchy, all these rules, they become chaos, and the people who live in that condition, they become chaos, and their life becomes chaos. And all the people who live in too much of a rule based system, they become so restricted and oppressed. They're just as in bad of a state as these rule-less person. So somewhere in the middle is a healthy balance of what is good for humans. And it's not China, it's not the US, it's probably Europe, somewhere in there. So look to the Finns, look to Costa Rica, look to Denmark and Sweden. There's some really good examples and progressive society development that these countries putting out, which is very commendable. Let's talk about the moments when you feel that you're free. I think the moment we feel we are free is right in the center between these two extremes that we've just outlined, where we have the impression that we act from our own will, and yet we're buoyed up by traditions. And so we're right in the center between both sides saying yes, basically. So the side that is completely rule-driven, all this conditioned side, if that side says yes, and if also the freedom side that wants to break away from all that, if this sides also agree to our actions, then we feel perfectly aligned and free. Because then we feel empowered. And freedom is always a sense of liberation, and it's this small moment where you are outside of both of these worlds.
But when the two sides are in conflict, you feel depressed, right?
Yeah. And you kind of have, because you constantly negotiate between both of them, and you kind of have to write contracts you're mediating between these sides all your life, like a fish in a river, and you kind of like make your way upstream and try to find a good spot for you. Freedom really is when you're free from both of this. That's what I think. And it happens very rarely.
Yeah, Jim Carrey, the comedian and actor, went through a long depression, and then he got out of it in his, I don't know how old he is now, but some years ago. And he's been super creative and just free and light since then. He started new hobbies like painting, for example. And he says that he realized that he was playing a role. I mean, and he didn't mean in his job as an actor, but the role he was playing was Jim Carrey, and that's not him. And I don't know what he believes is actually him. That's maybe difficult to put into words. But I think that's a very healthy attitude, and I sometimes try to distance myself from life as I know it and become an observer, because then it's like a play on stage and I don't have to take it seriously. I can just I can judge it or I can just like I said, observe. I can laugh about it because it doesn't affect me. And so I wonder what is I in this case, if it's not the person on stage. There's something that cannot be hurt, that cannot be attacked. And I think freedom is to find that and then to spend as much time there as possible.
Yeah. And then also once you've kind of gotten to know that area, then to bring something from that into reality and make other people enjoy it as well, because that's what laughter is for. And you connect through a little joke or something, and then two people, they function as one, and that is beauty. That is absolute beauty.
It is correlation. You just reminded me of quantum mechanics, where the separation of particles or larger systems like individuals is an illusion, and it is because, well, they're apart in space or time, but that doesn't mean that they can't act as one organism, like an ant farm. That's always a good example for me, where it's one life form, or many, depending on your perspective. So I want to make sure that my perspective is not given to me, but I want to be my perspective to be as natural and spontaneous as possible.
Yeah. Imagine if there's other life forms out in the universe, and they don't perceive themselves as inferior or superior to any other life form. They've already reached the level to understand that life is about life, and life is about the continuity of life. And we're kind of really struggling to get on with that and to learn that, and because we're trying to resuscitate a dead body, which is completely mechanical and made of metal, into something alive, and we're trying to be in awe of that magic event, but it will never happen, unfortunately, and we will kind of have to realize that very soon, now that ChatGPT has gone insane. So these other life forms, they might be watching us, and they're like, oh my goodness, these dorks, what are they doing? And imagine if they're already watching us because we're genetically related in some way. Maybe they have visited Earth many times before and have had relations with other human life forms here on this planet, and kind of helped us evolve in that regard as well. And let's just think we're already the aliens, and we just don't even know because we're too stupid to see that. And they can actually see through our eyes what's happening here. They don't even need to be here physically. They can already perceive what's going on. And that was just one of the many possible thoughts that I had. That is just funny to imagine. And I think if macrocosm and microcosm always relates in some way, and I always thought the way that the universe is structured, with how the galaxies are dispersed in space, it looks so much like a brain structure. It looks so much like brain cells with these clusters, and then they're linked, and then there's a lot of empty space in between as well. It looks so much alike. I realized, oh my goodness, maybe we're just like a brain cell in someone else's head, and we don't even know. We have no idea ever of getting that far to realize that perspective. But sometimes I have this impression that my life or my existence, I'm basically my life is the dream of a sleeping God.
I've actually heard that there are cultures. There are cultures in the world that have that as their belief. Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. It's so nice that you see there's a lot of people who think the same, and that's great. And when I die, basically, I'm just going to wake up and it's like, oh my goodness, this was nice. Or I just had the worst nightmare, or everything together. It could be all of that. So I just enjoy the possibilities of thinking in all kinds of directions, and then see what happens.
Yeah.
And see how life can be enjoyed.
I think it's healthy to think about extraterrestrial life, to zoom out, to see that what's going on here isn't that serious, isn't that important. Dying isn't the worst thing that could happen.
Yes, it is. And yet it is, because we do need to be responsible.
So how do you live a responsible life?
Well, the first responsibility you have is towards yourself and towards the knowledge you have about yourself. However, that may change over time. You're allowed to adapt constantly. But responsibility is really when you have your focus of reality and you see what's in front of you, the task that is presented, then do your thing, finish it well, and then move on to something else. I think responsibility is really the only thing we truly have as humanity. We do not possess any worldly material. We're not even in charge of our own body. We do not possess our body. We're custodians. We're guests. You know, we pass by through this existence, and then we pass on the material to someone else. I mean, we are made out of atoms that have already existed in so many other bodies and animals and plants, and we think, oh, we're so unique and blah, but we're not. We're basically, this entire planet is a huge recycled garbage can, and it's and life kind of takes new varieties every once in a while, but we only have responsibility to be well and to do well and to be kind, like Ellen DeGeneres says. Yeah, that's what I think.
Interesting. Yeah.
We had some good impulses, and I'm sure for those who listen, I hope they enjoyed the little ride we took them on, and maybe have them question themselves a little bit, and maybe find also some more certainty in life, and it will continue. It doesn't matter in how bad or good of a state you are. If you feel so cold and alone, or so far outside of human reach, believe me, that there's a lot of people who've been there and who kind of came back and realized that life is beautiful, and you're just experiencing the winter of your soul, and be assured that there's a spring and a summer and a fall coming as well. So that's just my little message of comfort and hope.
Thank you. Let's end with that. Thank you,
Yeah, sure.
Castel, for talking with us and giving us
Absolutely.
some
With
things to
pleasure.
talk about, to think and talk about. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.